You went to the hearing clinic and you sat in the booth. You pressed the button when you heard those little beeps, and then you repeated the word backs that you heard through the headphones. And 20 minutes later, you were told, well, your hearing's normal. But you know something isn't right. Conversations in restaurants are exhausting. You miss little pieces of what people are saying, and then maybe there's some ringing in your ears that won't go away. You're working twice as hard as everyone else is just to follow the conversation, and you can't explain why because someone with a degree told you that your ears are fine. So what's actually going on? The uncomfortable truth is this. A standard hearing test used in most audiology clinics today was developed in the 1950s, and it misses some of the most significant types of hearing damage that people are actually experiencing. I'm Dr. Layne Garrett, founder of Timpanogos Hearing and Tinnitus in Utah, and I've been treating hearing loss for over 20 years. And today, I want to explain exactly why the standard hearing test is failing patients and what a complete evaluation really needs to look like. Here's something the hearing industry does not advertise. The standard hearing test that most clinics still use, the pure tone hearing test, was formalized in the 1950s. Carhart and Jerger codified the protocol. Test thresholds in 5 decibel steps in quiet from 250 Hz to 8,000 Hz. And that methodology has remained unchanged over the last 70 years. That's the 1950s, the same decade we still treated polio with iron lungs, before the structure of DNA was understood, before the first commercial computer. We've upgraded every other corner of medicine since then, with imaging, genetic testing, cardiac monitoring that fits on your wrist, surgical robotics. The hearing test? Still the same beeps in the quiet room. Now, the audiogram is not useless. It tells you whether you can detect tones and silence across the speech frequency range, and that has value. But it's only one narrow slice of your auditory system, and in many clinics, it's the only slice that anyone looks at. The tools to see the rest of the picture do exist, and they've been around for decades, but most patients never get them. Maybe you've been told your hearing is fine, normal for your age, and nothing to worry about, and you want to believe that because the alternative, that something really is wrong and nobody caught it, is kind of harder to sit with. But you know you're still struggling. You're leaving work drained in a way that has nothing to do with your actual work because you spent the entire day trying to understand the conversations around you instead of just hearing them easily. You're picking seats in restaurants where you can read lips, and you've laughed at jokes that you didn't fully catch because asking someone to repeat themselves a third time feels worse than pretending. You're not turning the TV volume up because you want to, you're doing it because you need to. And you went and got checked and someone looked at the graph and told you, well, your hearing's normal. That's not a you problem. That's a test that isn't asking the right questions. And patients have been carrying that confusion and that sense of self-doubt because our profession settled for a 70-year-old standard and decided that that was enough. If this is the kind of information you wish someone had given you before your last hearing test, hit the like button. It helps more people find this video who need to hear it. And if you're tired of vague answers about hearing and tinnitus, subscribe to the channel. I post videos every week explaining what's actually happening in your auditory system and what most clinics never bother to tell patients. Now, that standard hearing test measures one thing, the quietest beep you can hear in a silent room. That's it. But real life isn't a silent room. Real life is restaurants with 30 conversations happening all at once. Meetings where 3 people are talking over the top of each other. A job site with equipment running. A spouse calling you from the other room. The standard hearing test does not measure any of that, and it never was designed to. And here's the biology that explains why the gap between your hearing looks normal and you're clearly struggling can be so enormous, because that is the part that frankly should make you angry. Inside your cochlea, you have 2 types of sensory cells. Outer hair cells are your amplifiers. They boost soft sounds and sharpen your ability to separate speech from noise and give your hearing the fine resolution you need. They're also the first to die when your ear takes damage from noise, age, or certain medications. Now here's what the research shows about how much damage has to happen before an audiogram notices that. Primary neural degeneration has negligible effect on audiometric thresholds until it exceeds 80 to 90%. Listen to that again slowly. You can lose up to 80 or 90% of that critical neural infrastructure and still pass your hearing test. Still get the piece of paper that says you're normal. And that's not rare. Average outer hair cell loss of 30 to 40% has been found throughout the standard audiometric frequency range in people over 60, with even greater losses at both ends of the cochlea. Researchers have a name for this: hidden hearing loss, damage your hearing test literally cannot see. Your cochlea is injured, but the standard hearing test just doesn't know that yet, and in most clinics, nobody is looking for it with any other tool. So what should happen when a patient walks into an audiology clinic? What I'm about to describe is not experimental. It isn't the cutting-edge research that hasn't reached clinical practice yet. These tests exist right now, and the equipment is in many clinics, and there is no legitimate reason they shouldn't be part of a standard hearing test. Let's start with the most basic one, something that takes 60 seconds and tells you whether you have a mechanical problem affecting how sound reaches your cochlea in the first place. Tympanometry measures how well your eardrum and middle ear space are actually functioning. Is there fluid back there? Are there pressure problems? Is the eardrum stiff? Does it have a perforation? A significant number of patients have middle ear dysfunction quietly affecting their hearing that no one has identified because it wasn't part of the routine test. There's no defensible reason to skip that. But tympanometry is just the foundation. The test that I feel most strongly about, and the one that is absent in most audiology clinics, goes much deeper than the middle ear. It looks directly at the sensory cells we just talked about. The test is called otoacoustic emissions, or OAEs, and those measure your outer hair cells directly. A little probe sits in your ear canal and a tone goes in. A healthy cochlea sends a little echo back that it's generated by those outer hair cells. Healthy cells, strong response. Damaged or absent cells, weak or absent response. Damage to outer hair cells from noise exposure, aging, or ototoxic medications can appear on otoacoustic emission testing way before it shows up on a standard hearing test. The standard hearing test might show normal hearing. The OAE is already showing the damage. This is how hidden hearing loss gets found. The patient who can't follow conversations and noise but passed their hearing test, the OAE often will show exactly why. The outer hair cell function is compromised. The audiogram couldn't see it. The OAE could. And tinnitus? This is one of the most important connections we make in our clinic. I see patients all the time who have really bad tinnitus and go get a standard hearing test and told everything's normal, we can't do anything. There's no explanation, no path forward. We do that simple OAE test and often find outer hair cell damage that the standard hearing test never caught. That damage is what causes the tinnitus. The standard hearing test didn't find it because it just can't look there. Every baby born in the United States hospitals gets an OAE hearing test before discharge. We've decided the early warning system is essential for newborns and apparently optional in the rest of your life. And that decision cost people years of answers they've deserved to have. Now here's the test that gets to the reason you actually went to get your hearing tested. Because everything we've talked about so far, the hearing test, tympanometry, and otoacoustic emissions, is still testing your auditory system in controlled conditions. None of that tells you how well you function when it actually matters. Speech and noise testing does. For example, the QuickSyn measures how well you can understand speech with competing background noise. Two people with identical hearing tests can perform completely different on this test, because the hearing test measures beep detection and silence, not speech understanding when it matters. The restaurant, the meeting, the dinner table where you're nodding along and hoping you're catching enough, the hearing test has nothing to say about any of those situations. If your hearing clinic isn't running this test, they're not evaluating the problem that brought you through the door in the first place. They're answering a question you didn't ask and sent you home. And then there's one more gap, a literal frequency gap that most patients have no idea that even exists. Remember how I said the standard hearing test goes from 250 Hz to 8,000 Hz? The human ear hears to 20,000 Hz. We're testing less than half of your auditory frequency range and presenting it as a complete picture. Extended high-frequency audiometry fills that gap. Testing above 8,000 Hz is useful for early detection and monitoring of hearing damage. The high-frequency cochlear region is the most vulnerable. Damage starts there and works its way down over years. Extended high-frequency testing has been proposed as much more sensitive for detecting early noise-induced hearing loss, particularly in younger patients, and identifying ototoxic medication damage before it reaches those speech frequencies. For patients with tinnitus and a normal hearing test, extended high frequencies often reveal exactly what's driving their symptoms. Hearing loss in the frequency range that no one thought to check. That's not a minor clinical detail. That's the answer someone has been looking for, sitting in data that was never collected. Let me tell you about David. He walked into our clinic convinced that something was wrong. He'd been to many other clinics and had already been given the same answer. Your hearing is normal. I can't help you. There's nothing to treat. But the ringing in his ear was getting worse, not better. Conversations on the job site were getting harder to follow, and he knew the way patients always know when they're paying attention to their own bodies, that something was not adding up. He was 44 years old, and he'd worked in construction for 20 years, and he played guitar in a band on the weekends. His regular standard hearing test in our office looked familiar, a very mild notch at 4,000 hertz, which we see with noise exposure. But previous clinics had seen that same picture and stopped there. However, we didn't. Otoacoustic emission testing showed outer hair cell response significantly reduced across the high frequency range, far beyond what his hearing test showed. Speech and noise testing revealed an 8 decibel signal to noise deficit, and extended high frequency audiometry found substantial loss above 8,000 hertz that had never been looked at. These data points together told a completely different story than the one he'd been given in other clinics. This man had been told 3 times that his hearing was essentially fine. He has permanent cochlear damage, not reversible, but for the first time he had real answers. Now he's wearing hearing protection at work and when he plays his guitar. We have a documented baseline to track whether things are stabilizing or continue to progress. He deserved the answers years ago. The tests existed, but the other clinics just didn't use them. Now I need to be completely clear. The standard of care in audiology has not kept pace with the science. These tests exist. The equipment is available and not that expensive. The research on hidden hearing loss, on OAEs as early detection, and speech and noise test as functional measurement is not new. And the vast majority of patients still leave with a threshold graph and no answers. And that's just not acceptable. Hearing loss is progressive. It doesn't pause while our profession updates its protocols. Every year, a patient spends with undetected cochlear deterioration is a year of noise protection that didn't happen, monitoring that didn't happen, and real answers about their problems that just never came. And here's the worst part. By the time the damage shows up clearly on a regular hearing test, a significant amount of it is already permanent. We have a test designed to catch early hearing loss after it's well underway, and we're calling it a hearing evaluation. The audiogram measures hearing in a world that doesn't exist. A silent room, a single tone, no noise, no complexity, no competing signals. And that's not where people live. That's not where your hearing is failing you. And until our industry is willing to close that gap, every patient who walks out of a clinic with a normal hearing test and no other answers deserves to know that their evaluation was not complete. I'm curious, has anyone here been told their hearing is normal, but you're still struggling to follow conversations? If that's happening to you, drop a comment below. I read them all, and your experience helps other people watching this to recognize that they don't want to go through the same thing. If you want to understand what a complete hearing evaluation should actually include, we built a free online learning center that walks through all of these tests in detail. The link can be found in the description below. And if you're here in northern Utah and want a hearing evaluation that actually looks at the full picture, tympanometry, otoacoustic emissions, speech and noise testing, extended high frequency evaluations, you can schedule in one of our clinics on the Wasatch Front. You can find a link for that in the description too. Thanks for watching.